cares about, and it was just not the way you would act to somebody that you just met. It doesn't matter whether you agree with everything or not. You just kind of, if you disagree, say so politely, well, I don't know if I agree with that, or, oh, that's interesting. I'll have to look a little more into that. I don't know enough about it. But, when you're acting that way, it's like, well, maybe you're not the kind of person that I really want to be spending my time with, if that's how you treat people that are close to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect mirror analogy of what you were referring to earlier, but the point that I was going to get into was when you're dealing with people sometimes like that, you can't, you can lead the horse to the water, but you can't make him drink it. And so I have to try not to feel bad about that kind of stuff. Like I've had similar situations, that being one of them, because I wasn't doing the best job at answering the objections when we were at the table. I think back to that sometimes and I think, oh, I wish he could hear me now. I wish he could just hear me rattle off these answers now, and I'd make him cry. He'd have to get up and go change his underwear. I couldn't do it then, but a lot of it was because I was being heckled. And it's hard to answer questions intelligently when you're being heckled.
Oh, yeah.
However, I still would have a lot more practice at that now. I still would have been able to stand my ground a lot more firmly, even with the heckling. It probably would have been a lot more fun with the heckling, to tell you the truth. But so just to give you an example, I do think back to that, and I think that's one person who probably is always going to think, you never know, people change. Something could hit him upside the head one day and he may realize, but that's one person who will probably never change and will always think that this is a stupid idea because I didn't do a good job of responding to the rudeness and the silly objections back then. But you know what? Mm-hmm. That's his problem. He's the one who's going to remain ignorant, not me. So, even though you tried handing out the pamphlets and maybe you felt like I just didn't know enough to respond to those objections, that's everybody. Nobody can be a Jacques Fresco within the first week or the first month that they learn about this. Everybody has to go on their journey and learn everything. So, unfortunately, the first few people that we talk to or try to explain these things to might not get the best, introduction.
And we're going to fail. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because I just yesterday at work, I listened to the I think it was a fireside chat that Storm Clouds Gathering did. They called Hard Questions for the Zeitgeist Movement that you and Neil were on. And, just really appreciative of the shout out that you gave this podcast show on that. But listening to that, I was really happy to hear how it was going on for so long, but no one was getting really belligerent. No one was getting really ignorant and leaving the conversation, even though, as it went on, it started to get a bit painful to listen to. Because I kept having to pause it every now and then and add my little 2 cents and then carry on playing it. Because the thing is, both you and Neil did answer the question of who makes the decisions. You both did answer that probably about 3 or 4 different ways, and then every now and then. One of them would come in and say, I still haven't heard an answer. And I would just have to pause and go, yes, you did! Yes, you did! But,
right.
Because the thing is, if I had uploaded that fireside chat, I wouldn't have called it Hard Questions for the Zeitgeist Movement. I would have called it Hard Answers from the Zeitgeist Movement.
That's exactly what I said to Justin. I said it's not Hard Questions for the Zeitgeist Movement. I said it's Hard Answers to Understand is what it was.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, I can completely understand the reason why it took so long to get to that point, because you had to cover so many different... you couldn't just simply answer the question of everyone makes the decisions, because it's proposed to everyone on the planet and we use the scientific method. That by itself doesn't stand. You have to build the foundations of that orientation around it first. And that's why I think a lot of people get quite frustrated with you, because that's why I've had to recently start saying to people, right, okay, first off, we need to lay the foundations of why I'm answering this question this way.
Exactly.
Because exactly. I can't answer it straight and simple, because that's not going to make sense to you. It's a bit like explaining to someone in the 1400s why tuberculosis is transported from one person to another. You can't just simply say to them, well, his saliva or sputum or whatever was transported to him and thus transmitted the infection. That's a simple explanation, and anyone with a fundamental understanding of infection control and the germ theory of disease will understand that, and they'll say, oh yeah, that's why. But if you're applying it to, like, say, for example, a brand new kind of disease, and people say, oh, how is that transmitted? And you go, well, is it an airborne virus? Is it fluid or blood transmitted or whatever? And you say, oh yeah, it was because of that. And then you go, oh yeah, because people already have the foundations of that understanding. But if for the kind of person who thinks that demons, are responsible for diseases and infections and stuff like that, you give them that basic modern understanding, basic explanation, and then they go, what?
Right.
So it's understandable why you guys had to spend over 3 hours going through that sort of thing, because it's way out of our current frame of reference. We're always thinking about things in terms of who makes, a certain person is in charge and a certain person makes a decision.
Well, yeah, I think that was a problem with actually a lot of the questions, not even just the decision-making one. And that actually was one of my concerns before we even broadcasted the show. It was the day before, and I had Skyped up Neil, and I said, I'm not still quite 100% sure what the format of this show is going to be. And so he called up Aaron, and we had a little chat, and Aaron kind of said, I still feel like there's a lot of stuff I agree with the Zeitgeist movement, but I feel like there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And I said to him, my only concern is, yourself and even with, I guess, the panelists that were going to be on, I wasn't 100% sure how that was going to be, and I just didn't know who everybody was. And he gave me the names, and I looked into it a little bit, but I told Neil, I said, my main concern is how much of the Venus Project have these people actually studied? I'm not saying they have to agree with it. I'm saying how much have they already studied? Because if people don't even already understand the basic foundation of what we're going for in the first place and why, it's going to be really hard to try to answer detailed questions. It's not going to make sense. And so Neil was like, I wouldn't really worry about it. And then when the show happened, it was exactly what I was worried about the whole time. I'm not saying that they weren't like intelligent people. I think that they were great panelists, and exactly. And it's like you said, it went really well and nobody was belligerent. And I even said that at the end of the show. I said, thanks everybody for being so patient and let me and Neil really get into it and answer these questions. And I just think at the end of the day, I think it was a great show. And I think that Aaron did a really good job of hosting. Some people were a little too hard on him and said that he interrupted too much. And I listened to it and I didn't think he did at all. No. But anyway, I just, looking back on it, it's not that they, the panelists and I'm sure other people listening weren't intelligent. It's just that there was a short amount of time, even in 3 hours, to try to explain such a broad concept. Because I think one of the panelists even said at one point, I feel like you're covering so much instead of addressing everything kind of, point by point, instead of just having this one big blanket solution for everything. And it's like, well, yeah, if we have to cover the entire concept in 3 hours, that's how it sounds, because we don't have time to break down every single aspect of human behavior and why we're doing it this way. But the point I'm getting at, without going off on too much of a tangent from our show, is that just to give you an example, there were things we spent a lot of time on that were like, not everything's objective. Some things are subjective. And I have a question, what if I want to move the transportation system, or I think that it's not close enough to where I live, or I don't want to have to go from Crockett, something Texas or Austin, Texas, or something like that was the question, just to get to the maglev train transportation system and so forth. But one of the things that Neil and I kept harping on was we need a realistic example in order to give you a detailed answer. And the reason for that is because I was talking to Justin about it, and he was like, one of the problems that you had with that discussion is, he was like, you guys were forced to answer questions for people that didn't even have a basic understanding of the technology that's possible in a resource-based economy and how the Venus Project would look. And I was like, that's exactly it. And that's why I brought up, I was like, if you read the FAQs, a lot of the stuff's answered. And she did say at one point, Cherie, she said, and I visited the website, and, I've looked into it. I visited the website, and I still don't feel like my questions were answered. But what I wanted to say was, I didn't say visiting the website. That's a big difference between visiting the website and actually reading every single question from top to bottom. Yeah. The reason that's important is because if you understand these things, Justin had even said, wait, before we even do this interview, before we even do anything, Do you understand geothermal energy? Do you understand what a maglev train is and how fast it goes? Do you understand automated, cybernated farm systems? Do you understand all these things? Do we agree on these things? Great. Now let's start with the question asking. Because what happened was we got to a point where it was like we were forced to answer decision making based on really false and just sort of preconceived premises that were kind of like, well, what if I want the transportation to start here instead of there, and I don't want to travel an hour? And I'm thinking to myself, if you understand the way these cities are going to be laid out, you're talking about a difference of 8 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it may be an hour or 3 hours for a drive, but when you're talking about hopping on a train, the difference between you living here and there is going to be 8 minutes. So anyway, it took me a long time to explain that, but the point I was making was I think if people really look into the details of what we're talking about and the technology and just the little things first, then they come together to make a bigger answer make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because I've actually looked into a lot of different people that have asked what they thought to be, you know, challenging and difficult questions for the Zeitgeist movement. I normally find that when it gets down to it, what people think are difficult to answer questions are really mostly, I mean, you know, granted there are some people who ask, you know, specific questions like exactly, you know, how are you going to deal with, I don't know, like current degradation when it's being transported from one place. Those are very good questions, but the majority of them tend to be irrational what if scenarios.
Thank you. And that's what Neil was getting at.
Yeah. And it seems that the people who propose these think that, how about if I come up with the craziest stuff, you know, maybe somehow I'll break them.
Right, exactly. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that was another thing that Justin did say is one of the things he didn't like about us being repeatedly asked the decision-making question, even when we answered it, is he said, I felt like they were looking for too specific of an answer in the sense that they wanted you to say, okay, so you're going to log on and there's going to be this online thing called WikiRBE, and then you're going to log in with your username and password, and then you're going to click on this blue icon on the left, and then it's going to show you all the inventory, and then and he was like, no, there's no way you could possibly outline the scenario to that degree because you don't have the software in front of you. You don't know what it's going to look like exactly. He was like, it's a concept. It's a general idea of how, like Peter always says, it's a train of thought. It's a concept that we're going by based on merit and based on whether or not this is a valid way of doing things. Once we agree on that, we can start developing the actual technical systems and how they would work and connect everybody together. We have the internet now, so we understand the concept of how we would, you know, join our thoughts and our ideas and make decisions together. We get that. As far as A to Z, exactly what I'm going to be doing, when and why, and who I'm going to be talking to and looking at, it's just, you know, come on. It's like that stuff's going to evolve continuously until we are in a resource-based economy.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the thing is, the vast majority of those kind of, like, you know, what if scenarios that I've encountered were from people who who I've just mentioned it to, either, you know, either on the bus or, you know, in a pub or even just with, like, you know, friends hanging out. And a lot of people, they tend to sort of like jump on it and say, if we pose something that's going to be so crazy, I mean, you know, how is he going to, you know, it's almost like people think that somehow, like, crass irrationality is not going to be circumvented by rationality.
Exactly.
You know, it's like we're going to come up with something so irrational that he's going to have to say, you know what, I don't know, and then we can go, yep, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. Wow! Right. Finally, we debunked it. Now we can go home. We can carry on watching X Factor or whatever, because he doesn't know.
Right. Well, and see, the frustrating thing about it too is I think with our particular discussion that we were having is I think that their questions and concerns were genuine. They just weren't being pinpointed in the right way, I think, because you can sometimes tell the difference between somebody who's just trying to stump you, who doesn't even really have a question, but they just kind of, like you said, want to throw out the craziest objection just to get, you know, a wide-eyed stare from you that you don't really understand or you can't provide an answer. But I think they even took offense to that at one point because Neil tried to compare it to crazy objections about setting your hair on fire and, what if I want 1,000 jets? And she did say, hey, hold on a minute. Our objections aren't really that out there. We're not really that out there for you to,
Oh yeah, she
compare
did
something
say
that's
it was a
silly.
bit insulting.
And it's